My name is Vorik. I used to be a tactical analyst for the Draken Imperium before everything went spectacularly wrong in ways that still haunt my sleep cycles. You want to know the exact moment my entire species realized we'd made a catastrophic mistake? It wasn't during the first battle. It wasn't when our fleet started vanishing. No, it was 3 months before we fired a single shot, when an old, half-crippled prophet named Kalen stood before the Grand Council and spoke 7 words that absolutely nobody took seriously. If you strike first, they will never, ever stop. We laughed. Oh, we laughed so hard. Kalen was ancient. His scales were dull, his horns chipped, his tail barely twitched anymore. He spent his days in the archives, not on battlefields. What could he possibly know about modern warfare? Everything, as it turned out. Absolutely everything. Let me back up. 6 months before the war, the Draken Imperium was riding high. We just absorbed 3 smaller civilizations. Our territory stretched across 12 systems. Our military hadn't lost a conflict in 2 centuries. We were, in our own minds at least, unstoppable. The kind of arrogant you can only achieve when you've been winning so long that you forget what losing even looks like. Then came the humans. These bizarre bipeds from a planet they called Earth, a death world, if you believe the planetary classifications. Gravity that would rupture most species' organs. Weather patterns that could kill you in minutes. Predators at every level of the food chain. The kind of place where evolution apparently decided that being terrifying was the minimum requirement for survival. But here's the thing, they seemed nice, diplomatic. They sent ambassadors. They smiled with all those disturbing teeth. They offered trade agreements. They even laughed at our jokes, though I'm pretty sure they didn't understand half of them. My supervisor, a tactical genius named Rillen, was convinced they were weak. Look at them, he'd say, his voice dripping with contempt. No natural armor, no venom sacs, no redundant organs. They're fragile. One good strike and they collapse. I should mention that Rillen was the smartest military mind in the Imperium. Graduated top of his class. Never lost a simulation. Had more medals than I had appendages. And he was completely, utterly, catastrophically wrong about humans. The tension started over a mining colony, some worthless rock called Xylan, for that happened to sit right on the border between human space and ours. We claimed it first. They said they'd surveyed it years ago. The usual territorial nonsense when 2 expanding powers meet. The Council wanted to take it. Simple as that. Send the fleet. Establish dominance. Dare the humans to respond. Classic Imperium strategy. It had worked 43 times before. That's when old Kalen showed up. Nobody knew exactly how old Kalen was. Some said 300 cycles. Some said 1,000. The guy looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts and held together with sheer stubbornness. But he had these eyes. When he looked at you, you got the distinct impression he could see every mistake you were about to make for the next decade. He shuffled into the council chamber without invitation, which was already a death sentence in most circumstances. Security moved to remove him, but council leader Thrak held up a hand. Thrak was old school. He respected the prophets, even if nobody else did anymore. "Speak quickly, Elder," Thrak said, his tail twitching with impatience. Kalen looked around the room at all of us. The generals, the admirals, the politicians, the strategists. And then he laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you make when you see someone about to step on a rake, and you know there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. "You're planning to attack the humans," he said. Not a question. A statement. Rillen bristled. "The humans are weak. Our simulations show a 97% probability of victory in any direct conflict. Your simulations," Kalen repeated slowly, "are based on species that know when to quit. The humans don't have that particular software installed." More laughter from the council. Even I chuckled. Come on. Every species knows when to quit. It's basic survival instinct. You fight until the cost exceeds the benefit. Then you negotiate, surrender, or retreat. Warfare 101. Kalen wasn't laughing. "I have seen their history," he said quietly. "I have studied their wars. Do you know what humans call victory?" Nobody answered. Whatever state exists when they finally decide they're done. He paused, letting that sink in. "If you strike first, they will never stop. They will pursue you across the galaxy. They will adapt to every tactic. They will turn your own strategies against you. And they will not stop until either you're gone or they are. There is no middle ground with humans. No acceptable loss. Only victory or extinction. Thrak leaned forward. You're saying they'd sacrifice their entire species over a mining colony? I'm saying they'll sacrifice whatever it takes. Kalen's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's what makes them dangerous. That's what makes them different. They're vindictive, Kalen continued, his ancient voice gaining an edge. They hold grudges, and they have this absolutely terrifying combination of creativity and spite that turns every conflict into an existential war. Reelan slammed his primary fist on the table. Superstitious nonsense. The humans have a fleet 1/10 our size. Their weapons are generations behind ours. Their ships are slower. We have every advantage. You have every advantage, Kalen agreed. Right up until you don't. And then you'll understand what I'm telling you. But by then, it'll be too late. The council voted unanimously to proceed with the attack on Xylan 4. Kalen left without another word. I saw him on his way out, and I swear he looked at me with something like pity, like he knew exactly what was coming, and felt sorry for those of us too stupid to listen. We hit Xylan for 3 weeks later. The operation was textbook perfect. We jumped in with overwhelming force, destroyed the human mining platforms, and established our own base within 6 hours. 0 casualties on our side. The humans evacuated without even firing a shot. Reelan was ecstatic. See? They're cowards. They won't even defend their own territory. This war is over before it started. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something kept nagging at me. The way the humans had evacuated. It was too smooth, too organized. Like they'd been expecting us. Like they'd planned for it. The human response came 48 hours later. Not a military strike. A message broadcast on every frequency we had. Impossible to block or ignore. It was from someone named Admiral Chun, a gray-haired human with scars on her face and ice in her voice. To the Draken Imperium, she began, and I'll never forget the calm, almost pleasant tone. You have committed an act of war against humanity. You have destroyed our property, threatened our citizens, and violated our territorial sovereignty. We understand this may have been a miscalculation on your part. Mistakes happen. We're willing to be reasonable. Reasonable? That word should have been our first clue. Here are our terms for peace, Chin continued. You will evacuate Xylan, 4 within 24 hours. You will pay reparations equal to 3 times the value of destroyed property. You will issue a formal apology acknowledging wrongdoing, and you will cede the disputed border region to human administration. These terms are non-negotiable. You have 24 hours to comply. The council chamber erupted in laughter. Thrak could barely breathe. They want us to pay them? To apologize? After we just demonstrated complete military superiority? The arrogance. Reelan was already drawing up plans for a second strike. We'll hit their nearest colony. Show them what happens when they make demands of the Imperium. I should have said something. I should have remembered Kalen's warning. But I was young and stupid, and convinced that our military might make us invincible. The 24-hour deadline came and went. We didn't even bother responding. That's when things got interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely terrifying in ways we couldn't have possibly imagined. The humans didn't send their fleet. They didn't launch missiles. They didn't do anything we'd simulated or prepared for. Instead, they hit us where we weren't looking, where we didn't even know we were vulnerable. It started with the banking system. Someone, and we still don't know who, managed to hack into the Imperium's financial networks. Not to steal money. Oh no, that would have been too simple. They redistributed it. Every account with more than a certain amount suddenly found its credits transferred to accounts with less. Complete economic chaos in under an hour. While we were scrambling to fix that, they hit our communications network. Every official channel started broadcasting human music. Loud, obnoxious, impossible to override. Some song about never giving someone up and never letting them down. It played for 6 hours straight, on every military frequency. Psychological warfare, Reelan said, his scales turning purple with rage. Childish pranks. It won't save them when our fleet arrives. But here's where it gets really fun. Because while we were dealing with the economic crisis and the music attack, the humans did something that still makes my head hurt to think about. They sent us glitter bombs. I'm serious. Cargo drones loaded with compressed canisters of fine reflective particles detonated in low orbit over every major Draken world. The stuff got everywhere, in our ships, in our atmospheric processors, in our ventilation systems. You couldn't walk 10 steps without getting covered in sparkly, sticky, impossible to remove human glitter. The military impact was negligible. The psychological impact was devastating. We look ridiculous. Our mighty warships glittering like festival decorations. Our generals holding briefings while literally sparkling under the lights. Thrak called an emergency council session. This is humiliating. Send the fleet. Crush them. And we did. Oh, we absolutely did. We sent our third fleet, 60 capital ships strong, to the nearest human colony world, a place called New Hope. Population 8 million, minimal defenses, an easy target. To make our point, the fleet jumped in, expecting minimal resistance. What they found instead was every human civilian ship in the system, thousands of them, arranged in a sphere around the planet. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels, even personal yachts. None armed with anything more serious than point defense lasers. Admiral Corvin, commanding the Third Fleet, sent them a message: evacuate immediately or be destroyed. The response came from what appeared to be a civilian cargo pilot. Yeah, that's going to be a no from us. See, you threaten our people, so we're going to make this difficult for you. You can't stop a military fleet with cargo ships, Corvin said, probably fighting the urge to laugh. True, the pilot agreed cheerfully, but we can make you shoot through us to get to planet. And we made sure every sensor in human space is watching. So go ahead, fire on unarmed civilians. See how that works out for you. It was a bluff. Had to be. No species would sacrifice thousands of civilians to protect a colony. The cost-benefit analysis made no sense. Corvin ordered his ships to fire warning shots to scatter the civilian fleet. The humans didn't move. Not one ship. They just sat there. Human stubbornness on full display, daring us to follow through. Corvin held his fire. He couldn't do it. None of our commanders could. We had rules of engagement protocols. We didn't massacre civilians, even if they were being strategically idiotic. While the Third Fleet sat there locked in the universe's most frustrating staring contest, the humans hit 3 of our supply depots simultaneously. Just destroyed them. Thousands of tons of supplies gone. And that's when I realized Kalen had been right. This wasn't a war. This was a grudge match. And we just made ourselves the target of a species that apparently invented spite as a survival mechanism. Reelan called me into his office. He looked tired. The glitter wasn't helping. Neither was the fact that someone had hacked his personal computer to play that same song every time he logged in. Vorik, he said, I need you to run new simulations. Factor in unconventional tactics. Everything, no matter how absurd. I ran the simulations. All of them. Every possible human response I could imagine. The results weren't encouraging. They're not trying to feed us militarily. I reported. They're trying to make it too expensive to continue. Too embarrassing. Too costly in every way that matters. They're fighting asymmetrically because they know they can't win a conventional war. Then we just have to stay the course, Reelan said. Eventually they'll run out of resources. Out of tricks. Unless... I hesitated. Unless what? Unless they meant what they said about never stopping. I pulled up Kalen's warning, which I'd recorded. If you strike first, they'll never stop. What if he didn't mean they'd fight until they win? What if he meant they'd literally never stop? That they'd keep coming forever, finding new ways to hurt us, until one of us was gone? Reelan dismissed it with a wave. No species fights that way. It's not logical. It's not efficient. It's not even sane. And that was the problem, wasn't it? We were applying our logic to a species that operated on completely different principles. Humans didn't fight for territory. They fought for pride, for revenge, for the principle of the thing. The war was 3 weeks old when things really started falling apart. The humans had figured out that our ship's navigation systems all use the same base code. So they introduced a virus. Nothing that would make ships crash or explode. That would have been too merciful. No. This virus made every ship's navigation computer randomly play human comedy shows over the internal speakers. Loud enough to hear, but quiet enough that you couldn't quite block it out. Every 6 hours, like clockwork, you'd get a dose of human humor, whether you wanted it or not. Imagine trying to plan military operations while some human comedian tells jokes about relationships and pets and politicians. Now imagine doing that for weeks, months, with no way to stop it. The morale impact was catastrophic. Meanwhile, the humans were hitting our infrastructure with surgical precision. They'd blow up a power station, but not before making sure the explosion created a pattern visible from orbit that looked like a human hand, gesture we later learned was very rude. They'd sabotage our water treatment plants, but only enough to make the water taste terrible, not enough to make it dangerous. Every attack came with a message. This could have been worse. Evacuate Xylem for... Thrak finally called for negotiations. We'd sue for peace. Cut our losses. Move on. The humans sent a delegation led by Admiral Chen herself. She sat across from our entire council with that same pleasant smile and those cold, cold eyes. Gentlemen, she said, you wanted to talk. End of thinking, the humans sent a delegation led by Admiral Chen herself. She sat across from our entire council with that same pleasant smile and those cold, cold eyes. Gentlemen, she said, you wanted to talk. Thrak spread his hands in what he hoped was a conciliatory gesture. Clearly, we underestimated your resolve. We're prepared to discuss terms. Oh, I bet you are. Chen smiled and wavered. Let me guess. You want to negotiate a ceasefire. Maybe we split Xylem for... Maybe you pay some token reparations. Everyone saves face. Sound about right? That seems reasonable, Thrak said carefully. Chen's smile got wider, colder. Here's the thing. We gave you reasonable 3 months ago. You had 24 hours to take the deal. You didn't. So now you get our new terms. She slid a data pad across the table. Thrak read it. His scales went pale. This is... You're demanding complete withdrawal from 6 systems. Full reparations for every operation. Public admission of guilt. His voice trembled. This is unconditional surrender. Yep, Chen said cheerfully. And it's only going to get worse the longer you wait. Every week you delay, we add another system to the list. Every month, we double the reparations. You wanted a war. Congratulations. You started one with a species that turned stubbornness into an art form. We have vastly superior military forces. Reelan shouted, slamming the table. Chen looked at him like a teacher, watching a particularly slow student. Do you, though? Because from where I'm sitting, you can't defend your infrastructure, can't secure your supply lines, can't even use your own computers without hearing human sitcoms. Your economy is in chaos. Your citizens are getting tired of glitter. Your military is exhausted from fighting ghosts. How's that superiority working out? The room was silent. Kalen warned us, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. The prophet, I continued. He said if we struck first, you'd never stop. Chen's expression softened slightly. Someone in your government actually tried to stop this. Smart person. You should have listened. She stood. You have 72 hours to accept our terms. After that, we start getting creative. And trust me, you don't want to see what human creativity looks like when we're motivated. She left. We sat there in stunned silence. Reelan was the first to speak. We can still win this. We just need to... To what? I interrupted. Fight harder? They're not even fighting us the way we know how to fight. Every time we figure out one trick, they have 10 more. Every time we secure one system, they hit 3 others. This isn't a war, Reelan. It's a nightmare. Thrak looked old, tired. Find Kalen. Bring him here. Maybe he knows how to end this. But Kalen was gone, left the planet the day after his warning. According to records, he'd seen this coming and decided he didn't want to watch. The 72 hours ticked down. We tried everything. Launched counterattacks. Tried to hack their systems. Attempted to match their asymmetric warfare. The humans anticipated every move. It was like fighting someone who could see the future. Every trap we set, they avoided. Every strategy we employed, they countered. And all the while, that deadline approached. With 6 hours left, Thrak made the call. We'd accept their terms. All of them. I was in the room when we broadcast our surrender. Watched Thrak read the prepared statement, admitting fault, agreeing to withdraw, promising reparations. The human response was almost immediate. Chin again, looking satisfied but not smug. Accepted, she said simply. Withdrawal begins in 48 hours. We'll be monitoring. And just so we're clear, if you ever, and I mean ever, think about pulling something like this again, we'll remember, we'll be ready, and next time, we won't be nearly so nice. Nice. She called this nice. The war officially ended 4 months after it started. We lost 6 systems, paid reparations that would take decades to cover, became a galactic cautionary tale. But here's the kicker. The thing that keeps me up at night. After everything settled, after we withdrawn and paid and apologized, I did some research, wanted to understand how they'd done it, how they'd beaten us so thoroughly. I found records of human military history, wars they'd fought among themselves before reaching the stars. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. Everything they'd done to us, the psychological warfare, the asymmetric tactics, the stubborn refusal to quit, the creative spite, that was them being gentle. That was them holding back because they had treaties to consider, rules of engagement, political implications. I found records of something they called World War II, the things they'd done to each other, the lengths they'd gone to, the sheer terrifying commitment to victory at any cost. And I understood Kalen's warning in a whole new light. If you strike first, they'll never stop because stopping isn't in their nature. Giving up is an option. Their species evolved on a planet where everything tried to kill them, and they responded by killing everything back. They're a species that bombed themselves with nuclear weapons and somehow decided the lesson was, let's make sure we never have to do that again, instead of, maybe we should calm down. They colonized the death world and called it home. They looked at space, a vast, empty void that wants them dead, and decided to explore it anyway. They turned spite into a survival trait and stubbornness into a philosophy. We're lucky, I think, that they decided to be merciful, that they showed restraint, because I've seen what they're capable of when they don't. Rillin resigned in disgrace. Thrak died a broken leader less than a year later, officially from heart failure, but everyone knew it was from shame. The Imperium's expansion stopped cold. Our economy cratered. Our military, once the pride of 12 systems, became a cautionary tale whispered in diplomatic circles. And me, I became a teacher. Specifically, I teach young military strategists about the human war. My first lesson is always the same. If a species from a death world offers you peace, take it. Because if you don't, you'll discover exactly why they survived when nothing else on their planet did. But here's where the story gets really interesting or really depressing, depending on your perspective. 3 months after the treaty, after we'd begun withdrawing from the disputed systems, after the first reparation payments had been transferred, the humans sent us a gift. I'm not kidding. A gift to the species they'd just defeated. It arrived at our capital world with no warning. A massive cargo vessel, human-flagged, broadcasting peaceful intentions. Security nearly shot it down out of sheer paranoia. But someone with more sense prevailed. The ship's captain was a cheerful woman named Sarah, who seemed genuinely excited to be there. "We brought you something," she announced as her crew began unloading massive crates. "What is it?" the Port Authority asked suspiciously. "Glitter removal equipment," Sarah said brightly. "Specialized cleaning systems, atmospheric scrubbers, the works. We figured since we made the mess, we should help clean it up." The equipment worked perfectly. Within 6 weeks, the glitter problem that had plagued us for months was completely resolved. The humans didn't charge us for it, didn't ask for anything in return, just dropped off the equipment and left. Thrak called me into his office before he died. He looked confused, which was fair because I felt the same way. "What are they playing at?" he asked. "Why help us?" I'd been thinking about that. I think this is what they do. After wars, they rebuild. They help. I found historical records. After their biggest conflicts, they helped their enemies recover, poured resources into rebuilding, turned enemies into allies. That makes no sense strategically, Thrax said. It makes perfect sense if you're thinking long-term, I replied. They don't want to fight us again. So they're making sure we don't have a reason to want to fight them. Making sure we remember that they can be generous as well as terrifying. A month later, human medical teams arrived, offering to share advanced trauma treatment techniques with our hospitals. They'd noticed, apparently, that some of our soldiers were suffering from what they called post-traumatic stress from the conflict. They had experience treating it. Then came the trade delegations, the cultural exchanges, the student programs. The humans were aggressively, relentlessly friendly, like they were determined to make us forget we'd ever been enemies. And it was working. Public opinion shifted. The younger generation especially started seeing humans not as conquerors, but as a species that sent doctors and teachers and equipment we needed. I met with Admiral Chen one more time about a year after the war ended. She was visiting our capital for some diplomatic function, and I'd been assigned as military liaison. We had dinner, actual dinner, not a formal state meal. Just the two of us at a small restaurant that served both our cuisines. Can I ask you something? I said after we'd ordered. Shoot, she said, then laughed. Poor choice of words. Go ahead. Why are you doing this? The aid, the friendship. After what we did, you could have just taken your victory and left us to rot. Why help? Chun took a sip of her drink, considering her answer. Because we're human. We hold grudges. Sure, we're stubborn and vindictive and will fight tooth and nail when pushed. But we're also pack animals, social creatures. We prefer friends and enemies, even enemies who attacked us. She leaned forward, especially enemies who attacked us, because we understand something that a lot of species don't seem to get. Today's enemy can be tomorrow's ally. Your grandfather might have fought my grandfather, but that doesn't mean we have to hate each other. Humans figured that out the hard way after a couple wars that nearly destroyed us. We learned that winning isn't enough. You have to win the peace, too. I must have looked skeptical, because she laughed. Look, I know it sounds crazy. Half our own government thinks we're nuts for helping you. But here's the thing. Right now, you owe us not just money. You owe us politically, socially, culturally. We could have made you hate us forever. Instead, we're making you grateful. Making you invested in our success. Because if we succeed, you benefit. And that means next time some other species thinks about attacking humans, you're going to remember this conversation. Remember how we treated you. And you might just warn them off. You're turning us into your advocates. I said slowly. We're turning you into our friends, she corrected. There's a difference. Advocates can be bought. Friends are earned. And friends don't let friends make stupid decisions, like attacking a species from a death world. She was right. Of course she was right. 2 years later, when the Forlac Combined started making noise about human expansion, guess who talked them down? Us, the Draken Imperium, former enemies of humanity, explaining in great detail why fighting humans was a spectacularly bad idea. We showed them our records, our simulations, our casualty reports. Well, okay, we didn't have many casualties because the humans had been gentle with us, but we showed them what could have happened, what the humans were capable of when they decided to be serious. The Forlac listened. They negotiated. They didn't attack. And the humans sent them a thank you gift, some kind of flowering plant native to Earth, delivered with a note that said, "For choosing wisdom over war." I started noticing a pattern. Every species that considered fighting humans but didn't receive gifts, aid, trade agreements. The humans were building a network of grateful allies. Species who remembered that humans rewarded peace and punished aggression. It was brilliant. Terrifying in its own way, but brilliant. But not everyone was happy with the new status quo. Reeland certainly wasn't. I found him in a bar 3 years after the war ended. He was drunk, which was unusual. Draken have high alcohol tolerances. He must have been working at it for hours. They broke us, he said when I sat down. Not with weapons, with kindness. They broke our pride, then gave us charity. Made us dependent on their generosity. We're not dependent, I argued. The economy has recovered. We're stronger now than before the war because of their aid, their technology, their trade agreements. He slammed a fist on the bar. We used to be conquerors. Now we're pets. Grateful, well-fed pets. We used to be arrogant, I corrected. We thought we were unstoppable. The humans taught us humility. That's not the same as being broken. You sound like one of them, Reeland sneered. Maybe I did. Maybe I'd spent too much time studying humans, understanding them. Or maybe I just finally learned the lesson Kalen tried to teach us all those years ago. Reeland died a year later. Officially, it was listed as natural causes. Unofficially, everyone knew he'd given up, just lost the will to keep living in a galaxy where the Imperium wasn't supreme. I felt bad for him. I really did. But I also understood that he represented the old way of thinking, the idea that military might made right, that conquest was glory, that strength meant dominating others. The humans had shown us a different path, one where strength was used as a deterrent, not a weapon, where former enemies could become friends, where the goal wasn't dominate, but to coexist. It took me a long time to appreciate what they'd really done, not just to us, but for us. They'd given us an out, a way to save face while admitting we'd been wrong, a path forward that didn't require us to be humiliated or destroyed. I teach that now. In my classes, I tell the cadets about the war. Sure, about the tactics and mistakes and the eventual surrender. But I also tell them about what came after, about the aid and the friendship and the alliance that grew from ashes. The humans could have destroyed us. I tell every new class. They had the capability, the motivation, the legal justification. But they chose not to. And that choice, that mercy, was more powerful than any weapon, because it turned enemies into allies, hate into gratitude, war into peace. Some of them get it, some don't. The ones who don't usually wash out quickly. The military doesn't have much use for warmongers anymore. Not after the human war showed us what real war looks like when you're not the strongest species in the galaxy. I got a message last year from Kalen, of all people. Turned out he wasn't dead, just living on some remote colony at the edge of known space. He'd heard about my teaching position. The message was short. You understand now? Good. Make sure they remember. Make sure they never forget what happens when pride overrules wisdom. But also make sure they remember what happened after. How the humans chose mercy. That's the real lesson. Not that they can destroy you. That they can destroy you and choose not to. I keep that message on my desk. Read it before every lecture. Because Kalen was right about everything. The humans never stopped. They pursued us relentlessly, found every weakness, exploited every vulnerability. But they also stopped exactly when they needed to, when we surrendered, when we admitted defeat. They could have kept going, could have ground us into dust. Instead, they helped us stand back up. That's the thing about humans that took me years to understand. They're not just vindictive. They're not just stubborn. They're not just creative and spiteful and terrifyingly persistent. They're also capable of extraordinary kindness, of generosity that makes no strategic sense, of forgiveness that seems to violate every principle of rational behavior. They're contradictions, walking, talking bundles of opposing traits that somehow work together to create something unique in a galaxy. I met a human philosopher once at a conference, got drunk together, which is apparently a human bonding ritual. I asked him to explain his species to me, to help me understand how they could be so gentle and so vicious at the same time. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "We're products of our environment. Earth didn't raise us to be one thing. It forced us to be everything. Gentle enough to care for each other, vicious enough to survive predators, smart enough to build civilizations, stubborn enough to never give up. We're not contradictions. We're adaptations. We became whatever we needed to be to survive." "And what did you need to be to survive us?" I asked. He grinned. "Terrifying enough to win quickly, kind enough to win permanently. You don't stay defeated if we treat you well. You stay allied, and allies are more valuable than conquered enemies." That's when I finally understood the full scope of human strategy. The war had never been just about Xylan 4. It had been about establishing a pattern, showing the galaxy what happens when you attack humans, making an example that was harsh enough to deter others, but gentle enough to allow for reconciliation. We were never really their enemy. We were their teaching moment, their demonstration, their proof of concept. And it worked. Over the next decade, human space expanded peacefully. Species negotiated rather than fought. Conflict were resolved through diplomacy, backed by the implicit threat of what could happen if diplomacy failed. The humans became the galaxy's peacekeepers, not through conquest, but through reputation. Everyone knew they could fight. Everyone knew they would fight if pushed. But everyone also knew they preferred not to. It was a more stable peace than any empire had ever enforced, because it was based on respect rather than fear, on demonstrated capability rather than theoretical might. I'm old now, getting close to retirement. I've trained 3 generations of Draken officers, taught them about tactics and strategy and the human war. But mostly I've taught them about wisdom, about knowing when to fight and when to negotiate, about understanding your opponent, about the value of mercy and the cost of pride. Last week, a cadet asked me if I thought we could have won. If there was any scenario where the Draken Imperium could have defeated humanity, I thought about Kalen, about Chun, about all the lessons learned in blood and glitter and stubborn human persistence. No, I told her, we couldn't have won, not because we lacked strength, but because winning would have required us to be willing to sacrifice everything, our economy, our culture, our very existence as a species. The humans were willing to do that. We weren't. And in any conflict where one side is willing to go further than the other, the outcome is inevitable. So we should have negotiated, she said. We should have listened. I corrected. When Kalen warned us, when the humans gave us terms, when every sign pointed to this being a fight we didn't want, pride deafened us, cost us systems and credits and lives. The real tragedy isn't that we lost. It's that we fought it all. She nodded, making notes. I could see her processing it, understanding that warfare isn't about weapons or tactics or even courage. It's about choices, about wisdom, about knowing when to fight and when to fold. That's the lesson Kalen tried to teach us. The lesson the humans reinforce with glitter and music and overwhelming creative spite. The lesson I'll spend the rest of my life teaching anyone who will listen. If you strike first against a species that doesn't know how to quit, that turns stubbornness into strategy and spite into survival, you'll discover something terrifying. They won't just defeat you. They'll do it in ways you never imagined. They'll make you regret ever raising your hand against them. But if you're lucky, if you're smart enough to surrender before it's too late, you'll also discover something wonderful. They'll help you back up. They'll turn enmity into alliance. They'll prove that the same traits that make them terrifying in war make them invaluable in peace. The humans taught us that, taught the whole galaxy, really, and the lesson stuck. These days, when species have disputes with humanity, they negotiate, they compromise, they find solutions that don't involve weapons or threats or ultimatums. Because everyone remembers what happened to the Draken Imperium, how we picked a fight with a species from a death world and discovered that surviving a death world requires being adaptable, creative, persistent, and absolutely impossible to intimidate. We remember the war, the humiliation, the defeat, but we also remember what came after, the aid, the friendship, the alliance, and we're grateful, not just for the help, but for the lesson, for being taught humility without being destroyed, for being shown a better way forward. Kalen knew, somehow that old prophet understood what would happen, saw the entire arc of conflict and reconciliation before it even began. I wish I had listened to him. Wish we all had. But in a way, I'm glad we didn't, because the lesson we learned was more valuable than any we could have been taught with words alone. We had to live through it, experience it, feel the cost of pride and the value of wisdom. Now I pass that lesson on every day to every cadet who walks through my classroom door. And sometimes late at night, I imagine Kalen out there on his remote colony, watching the galaxy change, watching species choose negotiation over conflict, wisdom over pride. I hope he knows his warning wasn't wasted, that even though we didn't listen in time to prevent the war, we listened afterward. And we made sure everyone else would listen too. That's the real victory, I think. Not the humans beating us in combat, but the humans teaching us how to live in peace, how to be better, how to choose wisdom over war. If you strike first, they'll never stop. But if you choose peace, they'll never forget. That's the lesson. That's the truth. That's what I'll spend the rest of my days teaching anyone who will listen. The humans aren't monsters. They're not saints either. They're survivors who learn to be kind without being weak, strong without being cruel, victorious without being vindictive, and that more than any weapon or tactic or strategy is what makes them truly dangerous. Because you can defend against weapons, you can counter tactics, you can match strategies, but you can't defend against someone who defeats you and then helps you stand back up, who wins the war and then wins your respect, who turns enemies into allies through sheer stubborn kindness. That's the human way. Terrifying in war, generous in peace, impossible to predict, impossible to defeat, impossible not to admire. Kalen tried to warn us. The humans showed us why, and now I make sure no one ever forgets. Because the galaxy is better for it. Safer, more stable, more peaceful. All because one species from a death world decided that winning was enough. You had to win the peace too. And they did. They absolutely did. Remember this. Choose wisdom. Choose peace. Because the humans will give you only one chance to be smart. Just one. Don't waste it like we did. So here's my advice to anyone listening. If a human offers peace, take it. If they offer war, fear it. And if they offer friendship after defeating you, accept it gratefully. Trust me on this. I'm Vorik. I used to be a tactical analyst for the Draken Imperium. Now I'm just a teacher. Try and make sure the next generation is smarter than mine was. The humans are out there still, building alliances, keeping promises, winning the peace one former enemy at a time. And somewhere, I hope Kalen is watching, smiling that sad, knowing smile, because we finally understand, we finally learned, and that impossible, hard-won, stubborn human lesson might just save the galaxy yet. The end.